everyone. If I could ask you all to please take your seats so that we're going to get started. I'm Freddie Surgeon. I am the James McCulloch Chair in Energy Law at Tulane Law School, as well as the Faculty Director of the Tulane Energy Law and Policy Center. As we kick things off, we're especially grateful for the support that we have from leaders across Louisiana and from Washington. Congressman Troy Carter will be with us on Friday, and Congresswoman Julia Letlow wanted to be here in person today, but sends her greetings instead. She asked us to share this message with you.
Hello, I'm Congresswoman Julia Letlow. While I'm unable to be there due to my duties in Washington, I appreciate Tulane's role in fostering dialogue about issues of importance. As you all know, energy is a top priority of ours in Louisiana. Our abundant supply of natural gas powers much of the nation. It even travels across the world. Energy powers our state's economy, and we have it in abundant supply. However, we must always continue innovating to ensure that our energy sector remains competitive worldwide. That means embracing new technologies, research and development, and new partnerships. Developing energy here in America is crucial to our national security. Louisiana is at the forefront of domestic energy production, and we need to keep it that way. Through conversations like this, industry experts and leaders can create more consensus on how Louisiana can truly power the future. Thank you for inviting me to be a part of this conversation, and I wish you a successful event. Please reach out to my office if we can ever be of assistance. Thank you.
We've gathered some of the brightest minds in energy in this room. So if the lights flicker around New Orleans, don't worry. It's because of the energy right here. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the second annual Future of Energy Forum here at Tulane University at its historic Uptown campus in New Orleans. And I wanted to take a brief moment to thank our sponsors. As you all know, Tulane keeps this forum free so that every member of the public can come in. There's a reason for that. Our energy future belongs to all of us. And that means that conversations about our energy future need to be open to all of us and bring all of us to this room. But that's only possible because of the generosity of our sponsors. So I would really like you to give them a round of applause with me. So many thanks to Bernhard Capital Partners, Delta Utilities, Enfra, Entergy, Jones Walker, Shell, Vistra, and Randy Ebner. There is no better place than Louisiana and the Gulf South to host this conversation. In fact, we will continue this very conversation on June 2 to 4 at the International Energy Summit convened by our partners and friends, the Association of International Energy Negotiators here in New Orleans, which brings one of the premier global energy discussions home to New Orleans. This region has long been central to the nation's and the world's energy story. It did audacious things like drilling wells beyond sight of land in 1947. We did not ever lose our spirit of innovation, research, and opportunity. We continue to lead today with that same urgency and vigor. If you live and work in a place as unique and uniquely vulnerable as New Orleans, Louisiana, you know why. That's exactly why this forum exists. To bring together leaders from every corner of the energy spectrum to think about what comes next and then to do it. It exists because of President Michael Fitz. His vision for Tulane as a cross-disciplinary university where law, science, engineering, business, and policy work hand in hand is what makes gatherings like this not just possible, but meaningful. Since becoming our president 11 years ago, he has positioned this university as a place where innovation thrives and bold ideas shape the future. Because of his vision, audacity, and leadership, Tulane can proudly say today, we did not rest and persevered to reach this milestone when other universities announced their first forays into interdisciplinary energy work, which brought fanfare. Tulane is one of the true global energy university that does rather than promises today. And that is thanks to him. Please join me in welcoming the leader who has championed his vision, our always audacious president, Michael A. Fitz.
Wow, thank you for that. That's quite an introduction. Wow. It's hard to follow that. So anyway, I want to welcome everyone. Good afternoon. You can tell I'm delighted, everybody's delighted to welcome you to the Tulane University second annual, and it's annual, so there'll be many going forward, Future of Energy Forum. It really is an honor and pleasure to convene hundreds of experts, leaders, and practitioners here on, as Freddie said, our beautiful uptown campus. Now, the inaugural forum last fall was a transformative moment in energy dialogue, and now we're building on that foundation to move these critical conversations forward. Now, at this moment in history, there's perhaps no issue more globally relevant than energy. Demand is skyrocketing, driven by forces from AI to global industrialization. As we meet this demand, we must also consider critical issues of affordability, accessibility, and sustainability. There are no easy answers, and that is exactly why we're all here today. I would argue there's no other university better positioned to address this issue than Tulane. We're a world-class research university located in one of the world's most significant regions for energy production that also faces unique environmental challenges. And we are in close proximity to America's heartland, where companies are investing billions in new data centers. This places us at the epicenter of the next quantum leap in technology. I'm sure you've seen the headlines a few hours north. Meta's investing $10 billion in a new AI data center. It was right here at last year's forum that this news first broke. That announcement, made on this very stage, underscored how central Louisiana and Tulane are to the future of energy and technology. And in the spirit of breaking news, I have exciting news of my own to share. Today, I'm thrilled to preview a major new initiative that will unite all of our work here at Tulane in the energy space, establishment of the Tulane Institute of Advanced Energy Studies. This flagship institute will serve as an umbrella for all of our energy centers and initiatives, connecting energy research and education across science, engineering, law, business, and beyond. Just as the Future of Energy Forum convenes energy experts across disciplines and perspectives, Tulane's Institute for Advanced Energy Studies will do the same for our faculty and our students. I want to thank Tulane's energy leaders who are working together to launch this transformative new institute. Pierre Connor of the A.B. Freeman School of Business, Dan Shantz of the School of Science and Engineering, and Freddie Surgeons of the School of Law. This work will amplify our impact in the energy space, both locally and globally. We'll be sharing more details soon, but you heard it here first. And so could we please all give a round of applause for the Tulane. So, from the world-renowned Tulane Energy Institute, the Center for Energy Law and Policy, to the Bywater Institute, our faculty and alumni find new solutions by crossing disciplinary boundaries, whether they're finding new approaches to global energy governance or developing new solutions for energy storage and infrastructure. Our interdisciplinary approach, our outward-facing focus, and our collaborative culture are fueling a research explosion at Tulane, with federal funding nearly doubling over the last decade. We're also expanding curriculum to meet the needs of the future. This includes a strong emphasis on building back engineering programs that reduced after Katrina, like civil engineering, which returned as an undergraduate major this fall, along with the new master's programs in electrical and mechanical engineering, and we are pioneering new cross-disciplinary programs like a master's in landscape architecture and engineering. So Tulane is proud to carry forward a tradition, a rich tradition of American higher education that has advanced human progress for centuries. America's global leadership is an outgrowth of investments in education and research that led to game-changing breakthroughs, from, as we all know, polio vaccine to mainframe computers. At Tulane, we're making our own investments in initiatives that scale up our positive impact. For example, on our downtown campus, we launched the Innovation Institute in 2022 to bring breakthrough ideas to market faster. This is part of an historic revitalization of the downtown campus and the surrounding area, anchored by the proposed redevelopment of the iconic Charity Hospital building. And the Future of Energy Forum is another initiative designed to connect our knowledge and expertise with real-world needs. This year's forum, we see it now, gathers over 1,000 thought leaders and experts from around the world, from business, academia, government, and nonprofits. We also welcome the next generation, students, early career professionals, who will be tomorrow's leaders, and they'll learn here how to lead. Across 3 days and dozens of sessions, we'll explore this year's theme, Powering the Future, Innovation, Competition, Collaboration. The conversations we facilitate here will contribute to the global dialogue, the critical global dialogue around energy solutions for the 21st century and beyond. So with that, it is my pleasure to introduce our first session. Our featured speaker is Bobby Tudor, founder and CEO of Artemis Energy Partners in Houston. Bobby has had a tremendously successful career in investment banking over 35 plus years and really a leader in this space. At Artemis Energy, he leads an investment and advisory platform that focuses on balancing the need to reduce emissions with the need for reliable and affordable energy. He's current chair of the Houston Energy Transition Initiative, a consortium of Houston-based companies that are shaping energy transition strategies for the area. And at Tulane, he serves on the National Advisory Board for the Tulane Energy Law and Policy Center. Bobby also chairs the board of directors of Greentown Labs. He's past chair of the Greater Houston Partnership and the Rice University Board of Trustees, in addition to serving as on a number of boards, whether in energy, education, medicine, and the arts. He's a true leader. Previously, he was founder and CEO of Tudor, Pickering, Holt & Company, an international leader in energy-focused investment banking. He's also a former partner at Goldman Sachs, where he led their worldwide energy practice. Last but not least, certainly not least, he's a proud Tulane graduate who earned his JD from Tulane Law School after attending Rice for his bachelor's degree. Please welcome Bobby Tudor. So I should note, to Bobby's right and your left, is the moderator of this session, Marcilynn Burke, a dean of Tulane Law School and the Mitchell Franklin Professor of Law. She's a nationally renowned expert in property, land use, and environmental and natural resources law. Under Dean Burke's leadership, the law school has entered a bold new phase of energy research. The Tulane Center for Energy Law was recently expanded and renamed as the Tulane Energy Law and Policy Center, reflecting its broader mission and obviously the issues we're addressing here today. Dean Burke previously served on the faculty at the University of Houston and the University of Oregon, where she served as its law school dean. She was Assistant Secretary for Land and Minerals Management for the United States Department of Interior under President Obama. She currently chairs the Board of Trustees for the Law School Admissions Council, and she's published extensively in leading law reviews. She holds a JD from Yale University and a bachelor's from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. So please welcome our moderator, Dean Burke, as well as our speaker, Bobby Tudor.
Thank you, President Fitz, and good morning, everyone. It is indeed my pleasure to have this conversation with our friend Bobby Tudor, and I'm going to jump right in and start with your career path. I know probably President Fitz said a little bit about it, but your career spans law, energy, finance, innovation, and of course, starting here, I would say, I know Rice came before us, but a JD from Tulane Law School. But you were a partner at Goldman Sachs, where you led the worldwide energy practice, founder and CEO of Tudor Pickering Holt and Company, which is a leading energy investment bank, and also formerly the chair of the Greater Houston Partnership. And now you're the chair of the Houston Energy Transition Initiative, and you serve on multiple boards, too many to list, including Murphy Oil, and the one, of course, nearest and dearest to my heart, the executive committee of the advisory board for the Tulane Energy Law and Policy Center. So, and then, of course, your current position as founder and CEO of Artemis Energy Partners, which is an investment and advisory platform focused on meeting the dual needs of driving down CO2 and other emissions, while at the same time providing affordable, reliable energy to the world. No small order. So my question with all of that wind up is, what first drew you to the energy world, and what keeps you most engaged today?
Well, first of all, thank you, Dean Burke, and thank you, President Fitz, for having me here. I'm always happy to be back in Louisiana. I'm a Louisiana native, and it's always great to be here. And I'm very happy to see Tulane engaged in these broader energy questions that are so important, not just to Louisiana and New Orleans, but really to the world. So thank you for having me. The energy world is fascinating. You know, I ended up in it because I thought it was just a really interesting sort of intersection of economics, science, geopolitics, with a lot of really interesting characters, and that's sort of what drew me to energy in the first place. And I certainly have seen a lot of change over this period since I really became involved as a young investment banker at Goldman Sachs in the energy sector. We're at a really, really unique crossroads right now, and hence this dual challenge that you mentioned, the need to supply the world with secure and reliable and affordable energy, a world that needs more and more of it, while at the same time looking to make that energy system much less carbon intensive, and in particular to drive down emissions. And it truly is a dual challenge. It'd be one thing if all we had to do was one or the other, but we need to do both, and it's going to take all of us working together to do both. And so that's what's really interesting about the moment that we're in. But as we've seen just over the past 5 or so years, there are a lot of twists and turns in that road. And it's not something that's going to be sorted out in the short term. It's really going to take decades, I'm sure, to sort out. But we all have a role to play in that regard, and I'm happy to be part of it.
So Bobby, you've been described as having a unique ability to sense what's coming next. And so I'm not going to ask you what's coming next yet, but how do you think you've developed that instinct?
Well, that's a very flattering thing. I think if I really knew what's coming next, I would never have worked for
it's in print,
a living.
So it's got to be true.
But I think there are a handful of things that have sort of come into focus, I would say, in the last 5 years. And at some level, I would argue that the Ukraine war changed everything. And the reason it changed everything is that it reminded the world the degree to which our societies and human well-being is highly dependent on our energy systems, and at this moment, highly dependent on fossil fuels. In the case of the Europeans, it was being so dependent on Russian gas. But it really, that realization changed the nature of the conversation, and it changed the nature of the conversation, in my mind, actually for the better, towards a more realistic view of the challenges in front of us. But I would also say that I think we've gone from a period in the last 5 years where the focus was all on climate and the challenges of climate change without much regard to the security and affordability and reliability of energy supply. And that wasn't a healthy dialogue. And we are now we have lurched to a different place where the whole conversation is around reliability and affordability and security without much concern for the challenges associated with lowering emissions. So I really do believe it's a dual challenge. Both parts of the challenge do need to be attacked by industry and academia and our NGOs and our policymakers. And it's a big, difficult challenge, and the answers aren't easy, and it's very, very expensive, and it's going to take a long time.
Right, so given all of this change, all of this uncertainty, we know that businesses can't succeed and just sit still, right? They're having to change their business models, maybe they're looking for capital in new places. What do you see, what strategies do you think are most effective for companies trying to protect themselves as well as still grow in this environment?
Well, every company is different, so it's very hard to make a gross generalization, and there are a lot of different pockets of the energy business where companies are doing very, very different things, if you will. But there are a couple of things that almost all energy-related businesses have in common. One is their business tends to require a lot of capital, and so having access to capital is critical, and the cost of that capital really, really matters in the ability of that company to be competitive. The other kind of common factor is that technology matters, and investing in technology and being out in front of technological change is also really, really critical to success. And sometimes those two things feel, a bit in conflict, and I'll give you an example of that. The shale revolution that happened in this country in the early 2000s and mid-2000s was not driven by our biggest, strongest oil companies. It was driven by entrepreneurial, smaller players who decided that there was real opportunity in kind of unlocking these shale resources that everyone knew was there. And I was right in the middle of that as a young banker at Goldman Sachs. I had the assignment to try to sell Mitchell Energy. And George Mitchell, for those of you who've kind of followed the shale revolution, George was really on the front edge of the thinking and execution of the shale revolution. And I took that around to every big oil company in Houston and otherwise, and every big oil company said, "Oh, we've looked at it, doesn't work, will never be economic, no interest, thank you." And so we didn't sell the company, and George Mitchell kept plugging away, and it got better and better, and he drove the cost curve down, and he ended up, we did end up selling the business about 3 or 4 years later to a company called Devon. And now, of course, every major oil company in the world is engaged in some form or fashion in the shale oil business. And the moral of that story is that technological change happens, and it doesn't always happen in our biggest, most sophisticated, most well-capitalized companies. And so I think that's one thing to keep in mind. So I have that in one bucket. The next bucket would be renewable power, right? Where, and I was right in the middle of these discussions 5 and 7 years ago in the state of Texas, where there were players in the onshore wind and utility scale solar business who said, we think within 5 years, a majority of electricity in the state of Texas will be generated by renewables. And we laughed. Right? We said there is no way that happens. At the time we had a bit of a nuclear business and almost no wind or solar. And on a very hot day this summer, a hot and sunny day in Texas, renewable power was at 3 o'clock in the afternoon was generating 71% of the electricity in the state of Texas, 71%. And what happened? Well, technology happened, right? Policy also happened, right? Because investment tax credits and production tax credits helped those industries get deployed at scale. But at the end of the day, it was really changes in technology that made these facilities economic. And Texas has a system where you dispatch the lowest cost electricity, by the minute. And the fact that 71% of that came from renewables this past summer is quite a statement. So it's technology at the end of the day that really does change the game. And being out in front of that and involved in that, I think, is kind of one of the most interesting things about the energy business.
Right, so let's stay there on innovation in energy. Of course, the industry is buzzing with innovation energy. And so what do you think really are the real breakthroughs right now, as opposed to some things that might be a little overhyped?
Every day is a new day. But I think we're in a situation right now where in some areas, and I would look at hydrogen as an example, the enthusiasm of 2 and 3 and 4 years ago has flattened, and it's become very clear that ultimately building plants at scale is going to require a long-term development of a market that will have to be willing to do large-scale offtake, at fixed volume and fixed price, much in the same way that LNG sort of evolved in the early days. And most of the players I know involved in looking at hydrogen projects and involved in hydrogen right now are saying, man, this feels really, really hard, even with a very large tax credit, associated with it. It feels very hard. On the other hand, CCUS is an area where the technology has continued to improve, and really the technology is in front of the policy in most places. Now, I'd give Louisiana a lot of credit here for having been out in front of the issues around the kind of policy structure necessary to have CCUS projects, but that works. And there are a lot of companies really very interested and prepared in doing large-scale CCUS projects. And my own view is that there is no path to dramatically lower emissions from our energy system, not just in this country, but globally, that does not include substantial CCUS.
And that's carbon capture, utilization, and storage for.
So that continues to be a very exciting, interesting area, and there's a lot of action around it. All that being said, all this stuff takes money, and it takes a lot of it, right? And to give you a sense, this last year in 2024, for the first time, global investment in non-fossil fuel energy was actually higher than global investment in fossil fuel energy by a very small amount. About $1.2 trillion for non-fossil fuel and just under $1 trillion for fossil fuel. But to meet the goals associated with Paris, for example, we would need to be spending $4 to $5 trillion every year between now and 2050 to meet those goals. We're spending $1 trillion today. And so when you hear people say, oh, we're just never going to meet the Paris goals, I tend to think they're right. And the reason they're right is I just don't see a path to spending $5 trillion a year to do it. So the capital intensity of this business is really stunning. And I think finally people are getting their heads around that. I would also point out that there's sort of a school of thought that says, look, if the major oil companies, ExxonMobil and Shell and Total and BP and those guys, if they would just do the right thing and take their capital and quit spending it on fossil fuels, which, by the way, would be a horrible outcome for the world, but if they would do that and reorient all that to cleaner energy technologies, we could solve this problem. And that's just not true, right? The total CapEx budget for the 7 largest oil companies in the world is less than $150 billion. And I just told you that we were 4 to 5 trillion a year short. So, okay, fine. Instead of being 4 trillion a year short, we're 3.85 trillion a year short, right? It's just going to take so much money from so many places to make these changes. And that's why I think it's really critical at the end of the day that we find ways to leverage our current system. And it's just too expensive and will take too long to completely replumb the world's infrastructure. And so therefore, things like CCUS and things like hydrogen and all sorts of other technologies that can leverage our current infrastructure, they have to be a big part of the answer.
Right, so given that, and we need to leverage our existing resources, what does healthy competition look like in this arena? You told the story of trying to shop around this company and no one was interested,
Yeah.
but then there was a shale revolution. What does healthy competition look like today?
Well, it differs by company type, for starters, because there are certain projects that only can be undertaken by very, very large, well-capitalized entities, and that's been true in oil and gas. It also tends to be true in the power business, a little less true in power. But the oil and gas industry is actually quite accustomed to that, and those very large companies are quite accustomed to that, and that all works well. However, when it comes to new disruptive technologies that really change the game, they actually very seldom come out of those biggest companies. They tend to come out of universities, they tend to come from our national research labs, or they tend to come from smaller, more entrepreneurial kind of companies. And therefore, this whole notion of having an innovation ecosystem that is focused on solving these really intractable energy-related problems is a really, really important piece of the puzzle. And that's something that we in Houston are after in a very, very big way. Now, even our biggest companies can play a really important role in that, and many of them do, right? Many of them have corporate venture capital arms that invest in these technologies and invest in the businesses. They often are the place that you go to do a pilot. They lend their expertise, they lend their technology, but they also know they are not really set up. They are not the best person or the best place for this technology to kind of emerge from, and that tends to come from other places. And so building that up and supporting it and encouraging it is something important to do.
You mentioned that universities are often the source of this type of innovation as well. And I know at Rice, your undergrad alma mater, that you've been really immersed in their efforts. So as we continue with our success here at Tulane, what advice would you give us in New Orleans or Louisiana for continued success in this area?
Well, one important piece of advice I think would be to make sure that traditional university silos don't get in the way of interdepartmental and sort of cross-disciplinary research and development. And it's a very common problem in the university world. I'm very happy I told President Fitz, I'm very happy to see Tulane have a conference here that is truly interdisciplinary, where you're bringing together all parts of the university. I think that's really critical. But as I said in the beginning, the energy world is a cross-section of economics and science and technology and data and geopolitics, all of it, and policy, government, all of it matters. And so I think for the universities, for our university system to really be impactful, they're going to have to come at it from that from that direction. And there's good signs of that. We certainly are working on that very hard in Houston at Rice, with not just Rice, but with U of H and UT and A&M. And I think here in Louisiana, there's a lot of cooperation between Tulane and LSU and other institutions around these issues. So that's great to see and important. And I think universities can and should play a really important role in meeting these dual challenges.
That's great, and I think that's one of Tulane's strengths, really, is interdisciplinary work. And what drew many of us to this institution is the ability to work across those lines. So that's That's good advice. I would also say that, while we're innovating, we still need rules. The lawyers now, we need rules. And so where do you think industry can be really effective with self-regulation versus where we might need policy changes today to help move us in the right direction a little bit faster?
Well, look, policy does matter. The rules matter, and the rhetoric also matters. But I remind people that in the Obama administration, for example, during those 8 years, we saw U.S. oil production go from 5 million barrels to 12 million barrels. And that's not because that's what President Obama and Energy Secretary Ernie Moniz wanted. In fact, I think they were kind of surprised and at some level disappointed that happened.
I was there.
Similarly, in the first Trump administration, if you remember, he was going to save the U.S. coal business.
I do.
And U.S. coal production went down 20% in 4 years. The lesson in both of those cases, in my mind, is that markets matter more than policy. And I would suggest that right now we're in a similar sort of situation where the federal government is all about energy dominance. And I don't know anyone working in the industry who thinks U.S. oil production is likely to go up much from here, period. Right? And so, and why? It's because of markets, and it's because of economics. Now, all of that being said, having had the investment tax credits and the production tax credits mattered a lot to the development of the wind and solar industry here. And having access to offshore, leasehold really does matter if we're going to kind of rebuild the Gulf of Mexico oil exploration business, for example. So all of that does matter. I'm a bit disappointed, I have to say, to see how the incumbent industry is currently kind of retreating a bit from their kind of previously declared commitments around getting a handle on their own Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions. And I see that in particular, for example, in the case of methane. I happen to own a company in that business, so I have a good window into this world. And the new administration's got rid of the proposed waste emissions charge, and OGMP 2.0 kind of backed off their declaration that emissions really needed to be quantified. And the industry across the board just hit the brakes. And they said, if no one's going to make me spend money on it, I'm not going to spend money on it. Now, we also happen to be in a difficult commodity price environment right now, and most incumbent oil and gas companies are in the mode of cutting cost, actually, and so any incremental capital gets highly scrutinized. But that's an example of an area where, without regulatory push, my view is there won't be much incumbent industry action. And I think we do need regulatory push in that area. So, there's some areas where markets matter the most, and then there's some areas where only policy can make a difference, and both of those things do matter.
Right, and I worked on that methane rule way back when. I've got a couple more questions, but I also want to make sure the audience knows that we will take questions at the end. So if you have the QR code, you can scan in order to submit your questions. I forgot to make that announcement. So that was disappointing, what industry did in response to the withdrawal of the methane rules. But as you think out 10, 20 years from now, what do you think will surprise most people about the energy industry?
Wow, it's really hard to predict. I'm confident the world will still be consuming a lot of fossil fuels 15 and 20 and 30 and 50 years from now. Now there's I think a good argument around when there's a peak, if there's a peak, when there's a peak. Most of the major oil companies that I talk to, for example, use kind of early 2030s to mid 2030s is their view is when global oil demand will peak and then start to decline, albeit on a very shallow curve. But there's a case to be made that we'll continue to have growth in natural gas demand, for example, because of demographic changes in Asia for another 40 years. But meanwhile, technology marches along, right? And technology can be highly disruptive and can make a big difference. And so, for example, in the oil business, the issue is not the reason at the moment that we wouldn't expect a lot more oil production growth in the U.S. is not because there's not enough oil there. It's because kind of the fundamental economics, if these commodity price levels and these extraction levels make it unlikely that the companies are going to want to spend incremental money to do it. That being said, if technology changed productivity from, instead of getting 12 to 15% of the oil out of the rock, you got 30 to 40% of the oil out of the rock, well, that totally changes the game, right? And it also makes oil production more economic at lower price levels. So technology can really make a big difference, and it's happening in renewables as well. The whole space of biofuels is really interesting, and you can imagine a world where jet fuel and diesel really do get replaced over time by more effective biofuels. So there's the good news is there are a lot of great minds all over the world working on these challenges. And I would expect that we will have some breakthroughs that right now just aren't even on the radar screen at all, that will make a big difference. I do know that providing energy to a growing world that needs it will continue to be a very capital-intensive proposition. And so having sources of capital willing to take risks to do that is very important, and we got to make sure that we have capital markets and a banking system and governments that support that.
So my last question, I would be remiss not to ask this, for the students here today, or will be watching this later, what skills or perspectives should they be cultivating at this point to play a meaningful role in that energy future?
There are a lot of different ways to make a difference in this business. I was a liberal arts person who went to law school and had a career in finance, and now do early stage venture capital technology investing in energy. There are a lot of different paths here. It is at its heart a technical. It's a technical industry where engineering and fundamental science play a really important role. But that's not the only place to make a difference. You can make a difference in finance. You can make a difference in the law. You can make a difference in innovation, and as well as in the more kind of traditional parts of the energy world. So I don't think students should feel that there's any one path necessarily that they need to choose to find their way into this. I kind of half jokingly tell students when I speak to them that, look, if what you want to do is work on the next great dating app, you should just move to Austin and do that. If you want to work on the most vexing problem in human history, which is the dual challenge of the energy transition, you should move to Houston and do that, right? And I think increasingly, actually, there is real interest in young people from this. I mean, a lot of energy companies from the traditional energy world would say 3 years ago and 5 years ago, man, we were just having trouble getting young people interested in coming to work in the business. I think that's much less true today, actually, than it was then. And we certainly see in this whole kind of innovation ecosystem area a ton of interest from really talented young people of working to find ways to create new technologies that can make a difference.
Okay. Let's see, do we have any questions from the audience?
Yes, the first question is, you said the transition to cleaner energy will take a long time. Will the intensification of tropical storms, record high temperatures, wildfires throughout the world, and the other effects of climate change, do we have a long time to make that change?
Yeah, like it's a very fair question, and the short answer is we don't know how long we have. And there's plenty of evidence that would indicate that change is already happening, and that change is quite significant. And emissions continue to go up, right? Not in our country, but globally, emissions continue to go up. So it is a problem with urgency, and we have to treat it as such. That being said, if you don't have access to electricity, and you live in India, and you've been cooking over an open stove, and you're given two options. One is we can get you electricity by burning coal and electrifying your village, or you can wait, another 10 to 20 years until we have cleaner options. Well, that's an existential challenge for that family as well. So the sort of the ethics of this whole dual challenge are really, really, really interesting, actually, and difficult. But that doesn't mean that therefore we shouldn't be attacking the problem, because we really do need to attack the problem. And I feel quite strongly that the incumbent industry has not just a great opportunity around all this, but they have a real responsibility around it as well. Not because they've been selling cigarettes to children, right? What they do has immense social value. On the other hand, there's so much expertise around energy systems that sit in these big organizations and big companies. What's very clear is that we're not going to solve these challenges without them. I think 5 or 10 years ago, there was this view that look, all of this change that's needed, it's got to happen outside of the incumbent industry. It's in the U.S., it's going to happen on the coasts. It's not going to happen in the incumbent world. I think there's much greater understanding around that issue today that says we have to have the incumbent industry working side by side with us to solve these problems, while at the same time, they have to provide a return on capital to their shareholders, and they have to provide reliable and affordable and secure energy to a world that needs it, and they have to keep doing what they're doing, and we need their help in coming up with good new solutions. So I'm a real believer that the problem is an urgent one, but the problem has many facets to it, and there are many facets to the problem that are urgent, not just the climate piece, even though the climate piece is really, really urgent.
What are the biggest legal or regulatory risks private investors worry about when deploying capital into energy right now?
Well, it's interesting. Our biggest global energy companies are quite accustomed to dealing with high levels of political risk. They operate all around the world in places that are highly unstable politically, and they accept that risk and they deal with it. Historically, though, there has been much less of that risk here in this country. And part of the reason the shale revolution just kind of exploded, right, was particularly in regions like Texas, was there's a view that the political risk associated with, reversals was actually very limited. And so that, combined with the fact that you never drill a dry hole when you're drilling a shale well, drove a lot of capital and activity into the U.S. onshore oil and gas business. So now we're in a period where not necessarily in the oil and gas business, but in the renewables business, it feels like we have a real regulatory whipsaw. And that makes capital deployment harder, right? And it means there's typically less of it, number one, and number two, it means that the capital that you do get tends to be priced higher, right? Because it's going to be priced to take that risk into account. So energy investors and leaders and companies and boards are very, very hungry for a less volatile regulatory environment than they are seeing in this country today. That's for sure. But on the other hand, they deal with it in other places, so they're going to deal with it here. At some level, it's their business, right?
Absolutely. Do we have one last question from the audience? I can't see the voice
You
of
mentioned
God.
move to Houston for students interested in taking on this challenge in the energy industry. What hurdle do you think prevents Louisiana and New Orleans from being the place to move to take on this challenge?
Yeah, I think Louisiana and New Orleans is also a fantastic place to work in this industry, particularly in the petrochem, part of the business where there's just an incredible concentration of assets kind of between here and Baton Rouge, right? Though, in Houston, when we talk about these challenges and the opportunities and the Gulf Coast, we really think about Corpus Christi to New Orleans and kind of everything in between, because there's an incredible concentration of assets there, and that concentration of assets really gives this part of the country a very kind of strategic advantage in certain parts of the energy transition. Now, it's not every part, right? But so, for example, in anything related to hydrogen or anything related to CCUS, because of the concentration of heavy industry here and because of our geology and because of our ability to permit new projects, the combination of those things mean, look, it's going to be a lot easier to get things done in this part of the country than it is in other parts of the country. I was in Boston on a trip to MIT and was talking to a young innovator, kind of a company that had spun out of MIT, and he had a new whiz-bang electrolyzer for use in the hydrogen business, and so I was just chatting with him about it, and I said, well, how are you going to move it around? And he said, what do you mean move it around? I said, well, unless the hydrogen is being consumed where it's being produced, you're going to have to move it around. And he said, yeah, I hadn't really thought about that. And I said, well, let me ask you this. Do you think you'll ever see a hydrogen pipeline built between Boston and New York? And he said, probably not. And I said, you know where there are hydrogen pipelines? And a lot of them is on the Gulf Coast, right? So there are certain parts of this energy transition, I think, where we collectively on the Gulf Coast, and that very much includes New Orleans and Louisiana, have a real kind of fundamental strategic advantage that we need to make sure that we're taking care of. Louisiana is very important to the future of the gas business, both to LNG export as well as to onshore production in the Haynesville in particular, and that remains a really prolific basin that will be important, we think, for quite a long time. So there's a lot to do in this market as well. Obviously, Houston just has an incredible concentration of companies. We have 25 Fortune 500 companies, of which 21 are energy companies, right? So there's just this incredible concentration of kind of corporate headquarters and talent and wealth there that obviously gives Houston a lot of advantage. But it's not all going to happen in Houston either. It's going to need to happen in a lot of places, and hopefully there's a ton of activity here as well.
Okay, well, we have come to the end of our session. And so thank you so much for helping us kick off this forum. It's been great talking with you today. And if the audience would join me in thanking you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for this session. Our next session in this space will be a conversation with Drew Marsh, which is scheduled to start in just a few moments.